All right, Lonnie, you want to take us away?
Yes. Okay, so just before we start, I'm just going over the norms for this event, the entrepreneurship, how do I pitch event. So try to have your camera on if you can. We would love to see your beautiful faces, and it just makes it so much more engaging when we can see each other. Please make sure that you mute your mic unless you're speaking. So we're gonna have a Q&A at the end. So feel free to put your questions within the Q&A portion, and also feel free to engage in the chat during the rest of the event. Um, Use this opportunity to network, share ideas, or engage with the presentation. And then at the end, we're gonna have a closing survey and also share some information about upcoming events. So that's gonna help us create content for future events. Okay. So just a welcome and introduction to entrepreneurship. So this is part of a three-part program. This is the virtual event program where we have monthly events for best practices on networking and skill development for entrepreneurship. And then we also have our community building portion where we're going to have a virtual event coming up in February, actually, the Entrepreneurship Cafecito. So stay tuned for that at the end. And then the national convention aspect. So at our national convention in Philly, we're going to be starting to plan some programming related to that. Okay. And so I will share the screen to Ryan, and I'll do a brief introduction while that is happening. Okay. So today we're honored to be joined by Ryan Ramkelawan and Dr. Isaac Rodriguez as the leaders of today's event. So let me briefly introduce them. A serial startup founder turned venture development professional, Brian has led two medical device startups through FDA clearance, market entry and scale, and one through acquisition. He now serves as the VP of Venture Development at StartCo, where he helps founders turn strong ideas into real opportunities. And Dr. Isaac Rodriguez is co-founder and chief science officer of Sweet Bio, a biotech company transforming wound care through FDA-cleared collagen and honey technologies. Sweet Bio has raised over 10 million, secured global patents, completed clinical trials, and has been featured by Apple, 60 Minutes, USA Today, Forbes, and more. Beyond his entrepreneurial accomplishments, Isaac serves on several community and education-focused boards and is a SHIP Star Entrepreneur Award recipient. So grateful to have you both here today. Feel free to take it away.
Yeah, thanks for introing us, and I appreciate everyone joining us today for the call. This is going to be a pretty laid back, pretty informative call, and we're going to spend a little bit of time doing some fireside chat. You'll see it in the slide deck, but Isaac and I are going to do maybe a little bit deeper intro, but not too long, just to kind of share a little bit of our background in entrepreneurship and our journey. Then we're going to go into a quick fireside chat, which, in your registration, you had the opportunity to kind of, ask a few questions. So we're going to share some kind of broad answers on those. And then I'm going to spend only maybe 20 minutes on really covering what you really need in a pitch deck. And so this is really focused on an investor pitch deck, but it can be easily modified for a sales deck and et cetera. So it's going to give you the building blocks, but I want to kind of get through it pretty quickly so that we can get to even additional Q&A. And as mentioned earlier, there's going to be a couple, and I can put the slides in the chat in a DocSend link so you can just download them as you go. But there'll be some QR codes for future opportunities that could be really valuable, and I'll kind of explain them as we go. Before we get started, maybe I can pass it to you, Isaac, if you want to share a little bit more about you, and then I'll share a little bit more about me, and then we'll go into the fireside chat.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Ryan, again for joining. Not only is he an accomplished entrepreneur, but he's also a good friend. So I highly value his input and his experience here. And I'm also a national board member for SHIP, and a big proponent of this initiative. So I just happen to be an entrepreneur as well, which is why I'm so passionate about this space. But as it pertains to this specific topic of, how do you pitch? We were, preparing for this call, and it's yes, your business, but how do you pitch yourself, and how do you pitch yes, your idea, but it can go into other places of your life. So when I think about it from my company side, we've raised 10, almost $11 million to date, and all of that we had to pitch. And then you're pitching something different in every stage that you're at. So in the beginning, you're pitching an idea. In the middle, you're pitching more of a prototype, right? And a concept, and you have something to show. And then towards later stages, you're pitching sales and you're pitching growth. And so all of that, just think about what stage you're in. This still applies to you and what you can do. So throughout the fireside chat, like Ryan mentioned, we took some of the questions that you've all submitted, and we're just going to have a conversation. I'll apply it to what I've learned and how we've gone about, raising money, or how we've gone about selling ourselves and selling our idea to others. But the moment you can get others to join in on your idea, that what we call internally at Sweet Bio is like that frenzy. If you can create that frenzy because your pitch is so good, that's what's going to excel you to the next step. And we hit $1 million of revenue last year, and this year we're already at, if we keep pace, we're going to hit over 2 to 5 million without any strategic partnerships. So we're still pitching all day, every day, just a different type of pitch.
Yeah, and maybe Isaac, to kick it off, I'm not sure if you really kind of shared it, but I think this would be very helpful, especially for the audience, like your perspective from when you were a graduate student and really thinking about, I'm going to go into this entrepreneurial journey. I think that'd be a fun way to start because I think it covers a little bit of the questions broadly. Yeah, but I think that'd be cool for you to share, that story.
Yeah, and building on to, how do you start? Am I good enough to start? We had a couple of those sessions which dove in, but really there should be some sort of aha moment where you believe in this idea, this side hustle, this family business, like whatever you're doing. So for me, I was a student full time, and then I had this as a project of this college and honey dressing, and it actually started off in dentistry, which I don't tell about much. So it was a dental product in the beginning that was co-developed with an oral surgeon, and I thought it was going to break the dental industry and be the best product on the market. And that's just me thinking as a scientist, right? Like super focused. I have this one solution, but then when I started sharing my idea with others and pitching it with my internal circle, like my sister first, and then some other people that I trusted second, I started realizing, well, this is more than just dental. This could be veterinary. This could be wound care. This can be spinal. This could be over the counter where people can buy it on Amazon and Walgreens and Target and Walmart. So it's interesting that one small idea, you just have to be open to having others have that input to call your baby ugly, number one, but two, to be able to take some different direction that you may not have thought of before. So as a student, I had no idea what direction that was. I just knew that I was passionate and I needed to move forward. So I listened a lot. We went through a lot of different programs, incubators and accelerators and other programs that Ryan will share later as resources. But the more we shared our idea, the more you started vetting it a little bit more, like this could be something. And then you share it with different audiences. So it was like the investor audience is typically last that you share it with. You want to share it with close family friends, refine it a little bit. Then we shared it with potential customers to understand, like, would you buy this? How much would you buy it? Then we shared it with like manufacturers. Can you make this product? Then we shared it with potential customers that would buy it. And then you go to the investors and say, well, look, here's all the feedback that I've gotten from everyone else. So it was this part-time interesting idea that turned into a full-time job once all of that momentum capitalized into $1 million investment.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'll share a little bit about my journey very quickly, and then I think we'll go right into the deeper fireside chat, and then get into the session. So, quick background for me. Also in healthcare, I was a surgical PA for a long time in organ transplant. So all my training was in surgical anatomy, dissecting, so just basically doing surgery. I didn't follow patients. But I did it for like 16 years and then eventually got out of the clinical side and got into hospital operations. And that's where the entrepreneurial side kicked in. I saw a lot of problems because, just being on the clinical side, you're really focused on, that patient dynamic, the very intricacies of surgery. And then I got into the business side when I was there. And I was like, well, hey, if we can fix this particular process, it would make all these differences for not just patients, but workflows and the financial side of healthcare. And that's where I started my first company, which was basically a class two FDA, device that really maximized the way that instruments were used within surgery. So it was a physical device. So there was a lot of manufacturing involved. There was FDA and clearance involved. And at the time, I didn't have any background in business or entrepreneurship, but it was that passion of being like, if I can solve this problem, is it worth it? And at the end of the day, it is worth it if it makes an impact to humans. And then ultimately, does that also make an impact to you as a founder or your growth? And so for me, it was an easy answer to move forward. It was just passion, but also it was nice to be able to have the background to help kind of facilitate that. And there's some questions in there I think that was delivered on or requested around, what is the right time or how do we really approach it? And just to give you some context, both Isaac and I had to make choices in our lives on, that particular question. How do you move forward? Because, a lot of times you have options. There's the safe options, there's the risky options, or, how you interpret it is really important. And we can kind of share a little bit more about that. But moving forward, I ended up growing that company to an international company. It sold and then got deeper into this entrepreneurial space where we, teach founders. It's a lot of how Isaac and I met, mentorship and teaching courses. And then fast forward many years, I got into the federal government where I was appointed by the Secretary of Commerce in the last administration, and I worked on global innovation strategies, a lot of national, but then global strategies on behalf of the US. And then now I do a lot more of, innovation brokerage type work. So I've been fortunate to help a lot of founders and think through different ways to present. You'll see that in the slides. I give that as context because what you're going to see from the slide presentation is what's basically required from an investor pitch, but there's going to be a few little caveats through my background and also with Isaac's background. But with that, I'll just throw out a few questions, Isaac. We'll just, instead of showing the slide deck yet, we can just do it like this and just do our fireside chat, and then I'll present the deck. But I think a good question to start, like one of the questions was, how can I bring my startup journey or how can I start my startup journey as a graduate student? And I think that'd be great for you to kind of share, Isaac.
Yeah, and even undergrad too, just as a student, right? Your priority is to graduate with passing grades, better than passing grades, but to graduate with that degree and figure out like what's next. So it's hard to say like, should I prioritize starting a business or should I prioritize my school and my classes? So it's tough, but if you can overlap it in some form of a class project or some sort of a senior design, as an example, if you're an undergrad, or grants if you are a grad student. So I know the funding is a lot smaller now, but there still are, if you're in a science space like NSF and NIH and SBIR and STTR grants, and I'm happy to have follow-up conversation with anyone interested in that. But if I were to do it all over again, I would leverage, I would leverage my .edu email address to be able to get some grants and funding to kick off this. Because when I started the company, I was towards the end of my postdoctoral fellowship. I was pretty much a faculty at the University of Memphis, and the product is ready to go. So the grants that I was going to apply for were more building the technology and doing everything else, right? So if I could have done that earlier, and what I would recommend is just start a company. I mean, Ryan, how much does it cost to start a company now in LegalZoom? Like a few $100s?
Oh yeah, like $300 if that.
Okay. Like $300, you now have a C Corp, an LLC, or, and Ryan, you can advise on the type of company to incorporate, but you incorporate something, right? Now you have an entity. Now that entity can apply for grants like with your university. So you go out there and say, we are going to commercialize this software, this technology, whatever it is, but you're getting funds for your company and for the university, not necessarily like you specifically as a student, if that makes sense. So that's what I would do all over again, and I would use those funds to be able to build up the evidence on the product and start, doing everything I did, but have it paid for. And that's no equity. So you do not have to give up a percentage of your company. You do not have to pay that money back. So if I was a student, again, looking back, it would be, starting the company soon, because you could even say that I've had a company for 5 years. Even if you haven't done much with it, you incorporated 5 years ago, but it allows you and it unlocks doors to, apply for these other grants. So that's what I would have done different. But the fact that the product was already at its later stage, at that point we had to jump in full speed into the entrepreneurship and leave the science and the development and everything else behind.
Yeah, and to your point, you know, there's enough resources out there now, like even sessions like this and others that we're going to share that help you really think about like now that you have an ideal, what is the patent pathway? Like Isaac mentioned, should you incorporate today or tomorrow, and how does that play in? Because it makes a really significant difference. And there's some questions in there about when should you raise capital, how do you raise capital, and having the legal entity structured correctly, even though it doesn't really cost much, up front, it could cost significantly more later if you don't structure it right. And again, you don't even have to be the lawyer. You just have to make sure you picked, between an LLC and a C corp and what state. And we're not going to get into all the nuances to that, but basically, it could be very expensive only because you didn't leverage particular resources versus if you get ahead of it and learn about it and then move forward quicker and with the right pathway versus changing it later, which a lot of founders end up having to do. And this series that we're putting on will most likely incorporate some elements of that that'll help you move forward so much faster and more efficiently. And I would add to that, when you eventually do talk to investors, it'll look so much better for you when it's like, wow, they made really good strategic decisions up front. So they're clearly more fiduciary responsible to the investment that we're going to make into them and feel comfortable that they're going to either do, even if they don't know it, they're going to do the right research or they have the right form of support that will make their capital be more maximized. These little decisions make a huge difference, maybe not always right at the front. It might not be as obvious, but as you move forward, it's going to show and basically be able to present you in a way as a more sophisticated founder, simply just because you made some good foundational decisions. So some of what we're going to talk about, we hope that you kind of like digest it, but then leverage this platform and even future platforms of education where you can ask better questions and, more adapted to the time that you're at. But as we move forward, and we'll kind of uncover some of it while we're talking about the pitch deck, because that's what you're going to present to future investors. But even if it's not investors, it could just be the way you're articulating your company to a general pitch competition, but it's going to cover some of these elements. But just for the sake of time, I'll pick just one more question and, kind of share it. Like, I think this will be fun just to start talking about because we're going to share more about it. But like one of the questions was, how do you find market fit? So that's like on the other spectrum, and I just want to make sure we encompass, a good variety here so people can learn. But I'll kind of push that to you, Isaac. As you were going through your journey, and and as there's so many elements of market fit. But if you can just share a little bit about that from your context, and then we'll talk more about it during the pitch deck.
That is something we do every day, honestly, because the macroeconomic space is changing. So the market is changing. When we first started, we were in dentistry, right? So I'll just use that as an example, even though we did not use any of the tangible data we got from that effort, the the exercise of doing that is the same that we continue to do every day. And we did a program that was co-hosted by Starco, who Ryan works at now, 10, 11 years ago now. And that program challenged us to reach out to 50 customers. So when you're thinking about market discovery, challenge yourself. Start with like 10 customers, right? Like whoever they are they consumers that would find you online? Are they your family friends? Are they, in my case, it was dentists or oral surgeons, so or periodontists. So we reached out to 50 of dental professionals and said, "Here's our idea. What do you think about it? How much would you buy it for? How do you make money, off of this? Because I don't know your reimbursement industry. So like understand their business model too and how they're gonna make money. Because yes, you want to do the right thing, you want to make their job easier, but at the end of the day, it's about how you can either make them money or and definitely save them money, like in one area or the other. So we continued doing that. One thing that completely shifted was COVID. Like we were about to launch our product in the largest wound care conference in the entire country, and it was April, I think, in 2020, and we were just like, well, we can't launch our product now because we don't have a conference to launch at. And we spoke to everyone. They said you should be at this conference. That's the best way to get in front of people and to understand more about the market, but also to get some sales. Now that shifted. So we had an idea going into that conference, but then we went back and we said, well, let's start interviewing another 50 people and then seeing what they say now because of these new regulations and these new shifts. And then we found out that, well, instead of care in the hospital, they want care in the home because it's COVID season, so they don't want to go to the hospital. They don't have to. So for these elective surgeries, can we get some care to the home and just deliver to it? That'd be great. So the market fit is never ending. You have to launch with something. You can't be in that analysis paralysis phase where you're just trying to get it right and trying to get it perfect, but get it good enough to launch, and you will get that immediate feedback quickly, and just be open to pivoting and adjusting. So we've finally figured it out. We've been a company for 10 years in a couple months, and that the what we're talking about now is has finally clicked at about year 10, year 9. And I'm not exaggerating. So it may just take you some time to get there. And we never, ran out of funding. We were close, but we never ran out of funding. And it was always just trying to get ahead of what the market wants, but be there enough so that they can believe and say yes today. So for us, it was finding the right partners and finding the right model, and it was all through market fit. And today, our model is if you go to the doctor, they can write a prescription, and it's basically a mail order pharmacy. That's the best way that I can describe it. But it took us so long to figure out that the mail order pharmacy delivering it directly to the patient is what mattered the most. Not the product, not the technology, not necessarily how much it costs. It was the access piece that was the market fit that we missed. So keep asking questions in every single stage that you're at, but also don't be afraid to take action and let the market respond to what you're doing.
Yeah, and it's a good ending point there. It's like, the longer you take to just be in research mode versus experimental mode, that's where you really learn because you can research this forever. Whatever, doesn't matter what market you're in or what you're making. Like you could spend 10 years researching, getting to the right answer. But while you're researching, the world keeps moving on. So the faster, to Isaac's point, that you can get to a point of like really getting customer interaction and really experimenting is when you'll find out like where you need to really hone in. So that's a very high level way of saying it, but a lot of us, I'm sure on the call, obviously Isaac and I have seen a lot of founders that like spend way too much time. You have to do appropriate research and well done research. And we're going to talk about that on the market segment slide, but don't allow it to hold you back to doing some form of an experiment because that's where you really, really learn. And you're not learning about just the market, you're actually learning about yourself. How did you construct that study? How did you ask the questions? What are the responses? And you're getting so much more tactical data from putting yourself out there. Would go, it helps you advance so much faster than having the perfect research. But for the sake of time, I'm gonna share my screen. We're gonna go through the slide deck, if it all goes well, I'll try not to over explain certain areas. But I want to be able to have at least 10, 15 minutes of Q&A. So really think about questions that are there. And it doesn't have to be just about the slide deck. Like you can just ask, other questions about entrepreneurship, but you'll get more out of this session if you really engage and ask, questions, because Isaac and I love to answer the questions and we'll be much more animated answering questions than just explaining the deck. So I'm going to share now. And then Isaac, just jump in if there's an area in the slides that you're like, hey, I need to explain further. I'm going to try to just kind of move along with it. So here we go. Oh, wait, can you see it? I don't know where I'm at now. Hold on.
It is starting to come. It was almost there.
Okay, wait, I just stopped sharing, I think. Been having issues with,
Would you like us to share it for you?
yeah, let me do it one more time. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, You see the ship logo yet?
You're good.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Surpass this. So yeah, this is what we're doing. Then some cool pictures of the two of us, but we did the intros already, so we can move back past that. You can see Isaac's product. It's cool. All right. So the way the slides are set up, this is a overview, and we're going to break this down a little bit. But these are basically the areas that you need to have incorporated, and I have it in two parts. So you have like the first part, so like part one, which is what we're going to go into, is kind of the story behind the problem solution, how big, and then the second part is really more financially driven. As Isaac mentioned earlier, sometimes it's not just generally the science behind it or the exact problem, but really the way that it impacts your customer financially, and so that has to all be incorporated into your slide deck. So at the end of the day, this is the bare bones of an investor pitch deck that you would need. And of course, these slides I put in the chat, so you can just download them and you have them there. And I'm going to break these down. This is typically a longer workshop, so there's going to be some slides I'm just going to go past because we're just doing more of an explanation than a full workshop today. So part one, as I mentioned, is going to be the beginning of your deck. So a few things to kind of note on the intro is that it should be very simple, and I'm going to show some examples where this is really where you're going to have your logo, maybe if there's a slogan that you're having, and some decorative imagery that's going to hopefully, help the audience. If you're presenting on a stage, for example, understand like, oh, you're in this industry, healthcare, ag, whatever it may be. So it's kind of nice to have good imagery that implies pretty close to what you're doing. It helps like lack of confusion. And a lot of times, if you end up going down this route, you're going to end up presenting all the time. You're going to be in pitch competitions. You're going to do a variety of things where you might be in front of like 5 other companies that's presenting, back to back. So this is your opportunity to like form your identity pretty quickly up front. So don't overlook the slide, even though it's pretty simple. It just allows the audience to start digesting about roughly what they might be hearing about. And then typically you go right into the problem. And one of the best methodologies for this, because us as humans, like, we're storytellers, from, the age of time. That's why we like movies, things like that. And so you really want to put this more into a story form context. It doesn't always have to be like, meet Jane and he or she has X, but think about how do you capture the audience through a story format before you hit them with like a lot of data or things like that, because it really sucks people in and it helps them be like, ooh, wow, this is story time. I really want to listen to this. It's more of a mental game to the audience. It sounds like it would be very simple, but you really have to iterate how you tell your story. And it's pretty quick in the presentation. So you imagine your intro might only, be 10, 15 seconds, and you're going right into the problem that you're addressing, which of course is going to be very different based on what industry you're in or what you're doing. But typically you're going to go into the problem in some form of a story format. And then after you establish that, because now your audience is like, kind of latched on, like, oh, okay, I see where we're going with this journey. You're going to talk about how big a problem it is. This is where you can get into the data. It's like Jane has this issue. We've been solving it, but she's not the only one. It's, 50 million people in the world, whatever. And then you're starting to share the data. So you're kind of layering on that it's not just a problem. It's a problem worth addressing simply because it's a big problem. And that's what you're trying to establish in a very short period of time. And we're going to share a quick 3-minute video when I finish this part, and you'll kind of see how some of these things layer in.
And Ryan, before you go there, I'll just add that this is like the hook, right, of everything. And although it's impossible, your goal is to make every person in the audience feel like they feel this problem, whether it's them personally or a family member or a coworker or something, right? Like they understand more than the data, that storytelling, like you said, Ryan. Like, yes, it could be a person, but it could also just be the way you share it. And if someone's like, you know what, I don't know because I'm not in this space, but I feel that this is a problem. So if you can have the audience walk away with that feeling at that slide, like they are really solving something here. They don't have to know anything about what you're solving or your solution or your technology. It could be way over their head. But this part is where you get the engagement of the audience, and then they want to help you, or they potentially want to follow up and say, like, I didn't know how big of a problem this was. How, what kind of business is there? And then all the business questions happen. So it is about we try to think about it as a feeling with those two slides. Is the problem and how big is the problem? But we want every single person to come up after the pitch to us and say, I felt that that was a big problem that you were addressing. So if you can convey that, then you've done your job on those two slides.
Yeah, well said. And then right after that, you imagine you're at like this, like story arc of your journey, and really, really think about this as a communication exercise. You're basically, like a movie. So you're at this arc now where like we was like, wow, that's a problem. Oh, wow, this is a huge problem. And now you're like, and this is what we do. We've decided because of whatever reason, our background and experience, or how close we are to the problem, we've created this solution. And so a lot of people go right into the solution like very hard, like, okay, now we created this thing. But it's nice to have like a buffer where you're like, because the storytelling, you also have to think about how humans digest information. So sometimes you got to give a little bit of a pause. So what I do between this transition is put like a buffer slide that it's not really shown here, but just imagine in between that dark space. It's like, me and my team, now that we've experienced this and we've really, are passionate about solving this problem, we've now created this solution. So you just gave like a quick 10 seconds and allowing the audience or whoever you're presenting to be like, oh, they're clearly going to now tell me the solution. A lot of times, if that's not done, they're like still thinking and digesting how impactful you've told that story about the problem. And they might have missed the first like 10 seconds of what you said for the solution for us to catch up. So, obviously that's not always there, or you don't have to do that. But, if you really want to be great at presenting and being a storyteller, you have to really think about how, you break up your story. So this is a good point where you could break it up a little bit. Obviously, sometimes if you're like pitching on stage, you're like have time constraints and things like that. But this is an important juncture. And so, however you break it up, you're going from how big the problem is, and now you're going to talk about your solution. And this can be pretty, detailed, and you'll see how we'll explain it later, but you basically want to make sure that they understand, what the solution is. Is it a digital platform? Is it, a physical product, things like that? How does it address the problem? Like, it's pretty broad, and we're not going to dive in full detail of that, but you get kind of the point of like, this is where you're going to introduce what the solution is. And then the next slide is really where you're going to talk about how it benefits your customers, patients, whoever it is that you're addressing. And this could be basically correlated to all of the problem statements that you've addressed. Whatever you're solving or whatever the problem was, or like, it's this issue, this issue, this issue. Your benefit should really cover that pretty specifically. So if you rattled off 20 different problems, your benefits should like correlate to it. So make sure it's not unbalanced. That's a pretty broad statement. It's going to be obviously very specific and different to everything that you're developing, depending on your industry. But typically, you'll talk about your solution, you go into the benefits of it, and typically not features. Like we're better because we have these two other, buttons or apps or whatever. It should be very specific to how does that actually address the solution. And then and then some of these slides can be moved around. The top level is usually pretty standard. Like that's what you're going to say from a storyboard format. I personally like having a competition after benefits, because then you're going to talk about, like, hey, here's our solution. Here's the benefits that we're providing to the problem that we just stated. And then be able to say there is competition, but they're lacking X, Y, and Z. And this is where we're more unique per se. And what's important about this is that everyone's always going to have some level of competition. And it's important that you as a new company understands that. So nobody should ever walk up and be like, we have no competition. There's always some level of competition. You might be significantly better potentially, but there's generally something that they're either already using or a competitor of some form out there. So you're going to talk about that, and I'll show an example slide of that. So you typically go into your competition. This is the end of this. We're not going to do this exercise, but maybe we'll do this, in another workshop session. But let me just slide by. So this is basically the end of part one, is where you really got your intro, you're talking about your problem solution, your benefits, who's out there in the market. And then part two is going to be more specific to some of the business aspects of your pitch presentation. So typically now you're going to go into, your go-to-market strategy. And so the reason why it's a slightly different color, because this is scaled based on where you are as a company. So if you're just getting started and you're kind of theoretically throwing out, kind of what you're doing, well, you might not have a fully, built go-to-market strategy because you're still figuring out exactly how to solve the problem that you're addressing. But it should still be something that's talked about. You could do research on competitors and how they went to market, or some theory on how you think you're going to want to go to market. But this is, and of course, if you're presenting and you're like, oh, we're already at, $50 million in revenue, of course, we're going to expect the go-to-market strategy to be a totally more in-depth thing versus if you're like, we just filed our patent and we're trying to figure our way out. But it's something that you should always research, address. The point is that this scales based on where you are in your company, but a lot of time should be spent there to figure out, what you're going to do when you do get into the market, or if you're in the market, how you're going to expand. And then I do this maybe slightly differently, but basically the business model and market size, I usually tie them together. So you'll typically see the market size being in three kind of circles, so you're going to see your total market. So the example would be, you're in logistics somehow, whatever that means. You could be helping a platform to help, airports operate better, for example. But when you do the logistics market size, it's going to be huge because they're going to incorporate everything from airplane tires to the little carts, that Delta use, things like that. But you might be doing something very specific that within that market, it doesn't represent that total market. So you're just going to say that the logistics market is whatever it is, $50 billion. But then you're going to get into what you're servicing. So if you're doing a logistics platform, you're going to have to do a bottoms up math calculation as to like, what does your platform address? Who within that industry would be your target customer? And then do basically, I sell it for $50. There's 50 million customers out there. That's kind of where I'm at in my market. And then sometimes you'll have a third bubble, which is like, but we're going to start in whatever state you're in or whatever area you decided that's the most, good beachhead market. So I like having the business model being like some level of math that's like, okay, if we math all this out, we think as a SaaS platform or a product or whatever, we sell it for X amount of money. It could be wrong at front, but you're getting some estimates. And we believe that there's X amount of customers out there. You math that out, you're going to get a closer market size versus just saying like, we're in logistics $50 billion, and then move on from that. And so, we could spend 4 hours modeling this out, but I just want to say that this is one of the most important slides that you can talk about. And if you do enough work here and really figure it out, you can gain a lot of credibility as a founder of just basically really exploring the math models, the not necessarily the full sales strategy, but like really understanding how that's going to play out for you. It'll make a huge difference.
Yeah, Ryan, to that point, we use a tops down and bottoms up approach for that market size. So what I mean, like tops down is you do all the research you can on Google and you figure out what is the market size. So I know wound care the best, but like what is the market size for wound care? And then you get a global market, right? And then what is the what is the market for a US? Well, that's still all wound care. That includes surgeries, that include diabetic ulcers, that includes dermatology procedures, right? All these different things. So now let's further segment it and further segment it. Let's say now our market is the wound care that specifically for our product is 11, 12 billion dollars. Like that compared to the hundreds of billions. Like if you throw out like it's hundreds of billions of dollars, then you may lose some investors because they're just like, but is that really, really what you're going after? So keep going down and try to find what you can specific to your technology for that total addressable market. And then do something realistic. Like if the first year, maybe we capture 0.1% of that market, we're still at 100,000, right, dollars for revenue or something like that, which is a good first year. And then we're going to capture 1% of the market, which is, so it keeps going up, right? And then 10% of the market, which is a million. And so it keeps going up that way. And then so that's one way to get to the addressable market. The other way is what I mentioned about the customer discovery. From those 50 interviews that you did from the customers, ask them, well, how much of this would you use a day, a week, a month? If it's a service, is this something that you would resubscribe to every single month? And then how much revenue is from those 50 doctors on average? Well, if or 50 customers on average. And let's say there are 10,000 of those specific customers in the country, you take that average and then you multiply it to get the 10,000, and then you're not going to get the exact number, but maybe it's somewhere close. So when you're defending this slide, like, well, how did you get this number of the market size is this? And you're like, well, we did the research, we got the reports, data shows this, but we also, and this is the home run part, is we, boots on the ground, we spoke to 50 people, and all these doctors and all these people said they would use 10 products a day, 20 products a week. And if we extrapolate that across the 10,000 of these customers that are across the country, like that's how we get to a realistic number. And if we can reach 10% of those customers, of 1% of those customers, then we get there. So you try to get that sandwich and meet in the middle, because if you just do one, then you're just, pulling numbers from the sky and you hope it works. But if you show that you did the research as well as part of that market discovery, and like you don't have to defend it up front, but if you say like that's where these numbers came from, it gives you so much credibility that you are in tune with the market and the market size.
Yeah. And following that is going to be simple projections. I say it's simple here because this is typically more geared towards a stage presentation where you're very limited on time. So some stage presentations, like if you're in a pitch competition, don't require, projections necessarily. But if you're obviously meeting with an investor one-on-one, or it's very specific to maybe it's a group of investors, you're going to spend a little bit more time on projections. This is like also an entire workshop on figuring out how you do that. But at the end of the day, back to what Isaac's saying, when you're doing your business model and your market size, there's going to be a lot of that research and data and things like that that's going to help you build your projections. It's just here meaning that sometimes you need it for a stage presentation, sometimes you don't, but you will 100% need to have some level of projections if you're meeting with an investor. And you'll hear a lot, like if you do a lot of research on this, that you're so early on, there's so many unconfirmed numbers. Like, how is it possible to do projections? And there's a level of that's true. Like, you don't exactly know if you're going to market right now versus a few months from now. So like, it's not going to be fully accurate upfront without, it's not going to be accurate at all on projections immediately. But what's really important to understand is that how you build your financial model, besides that, we already know from like an investor perspective that your projections are probably not right because you just don't have the data right now. It's interesting to see how you built your model. How did you look at operational expenses? How did you look at growth? Things like that. So there's a lot more we can understand from your projections than just being like, theoretically, you're going to be at $100 million in revenue in year 4. It's going to be like, well, that's interesting, but at that growth rate, how did you model out your, inventory or this or that? So if you learn a bit more about how operational finance works, it's going to give you also some credibility when you're looking at projections. And then just to kind of like summarize towards the end, you're going to have your team slide. The best thing I can say there is keep it very simple. This is not a resume. You're going to have some nice headshots, obviously who is founders, co-founders, that kind of thing. What roles are there? You'll have your advisors, either on this slide or a separate slide, but just make sure that it's very clear that who's actually operating the company, who's advisors, and don't like overdo it. This is typically good on like a few bullet points on each founder. You can have your logo wall on like cool schools and employers, that kind of thing, but just keep it very simple. Don't make it a resume. And then the progress slide is really nice, where you're kind of showing where you're at, like, oh, I filed my LLC or C Corp, I did a patent, here we are, we raised X amount, we got into a program. Doing it on a nice linear timeline is really cool because it gives us a quick viewpoint of like, wow, from when they started, they really executed very well, and here they are now. And then you get into the ask, like, and now we're raising X amount of money, and with that money, whatever that is, we're going to do this, this, and this. The only important thing that I would say here is that, whatever it is that you model out financially for your ask, and that's again another full workshop, but basically you should correlate to, notable milestones, not just use of funds. The example I always give is that you could be like, I'm raising $100,000. I'm going to use 20,000 for marketing, 10,000 for this, and so on and so forth. But what does 20,000 in marketing actually theoretically transition to versus me saying, raising $100,000, we anticipating getting to 2 customers, yield maybe X amount of revenue. So that way it's a little bit more tangible, like, okay, it's 100 grand, they think they're going to get here, which makes it more de-risked as a company versus just explaining the spend. You can have them both, but if you don't have a milestone behind it, it's harder to justify or understand why you're raising what to get to where you are, or like your next tranche of capital or progress that's moving forward. And then the final part is obviously your close. The only thing I can say that you can keep it very simple. I mean, it should be a simple slide. But if you're in like a big pitch competition, for example, and there's like 10 companies going on, you need to make sure that you have obviously your contact information. Some people put like a couple bullet points to help people remember. Like, oh yeah, what was the key thing? Because you might have already forgot some of the key points from the problem because you're throwing this out like in a 3 to 5 minute quick period of time. So the closing slide is nice because this is where people are going to take a picture on their phone, like, oh, I'll contact them later. So I typically like, having a couple key points like key takeaways, contact information. If you have a QR code you wanted to share for your website or Calendly or whatever it is, but use it as like an active slide. And lastly on that, if you are in like a stage situation, it usually stays up for a long time because, if there's Q&A, this is the backdrop, and so like people are clapping, things like that. So don't just make it where it's just like, thank you, And so with that, I know we're gonna kind of start running out of time, but at the end of the day, that's like the full context. Like if at minimum, if you have these slides built in, you're going to have a majority of what you need to start building out any other intricacies in your pitch deck. But at minimum, this is kind of where you need to be, or at least start researching, what you're missing or what you need to, improve on is this basic level of slides. Some of the rest, I think there's some questions filling up, but typically I'll show a quick video, but it's not really, I think, necessary here because Isaac and I are going back and forth. Last things, we kind of already talked about this, considerations. The go-to-market, could be very simple. And as you kind of grow, with your company, you'll start obviously making that a little bit more robust. At minimum, with your business model and market size is like, how do you make money and how does that correlate to the bigger picture of the market? And of course, that'll scale as you go. But as Isaac mentioned, this is a very important area that you can do a lot of research and get some real-time feedback from customers and really solidify as close as you can where you would lie there. And as I mentioned earlier, simple projections are not always required for a stage presentation, but of course, if you're meeting directly with investors, that's going to be a part of it. The ask doesn't always have to be monetary. One issue that I see come up pretty frequently is that you'll have a founder pitch and they're asking for some whatever the amount of money is, but there's not enough math behind it that makes sense. And you can really start asking a few questions and it breaks credibility. So if you're going to ask for whatever, 100,000, 50, $1 million, whatever it is, you should have a really good understanding of what you're going to spend, where you think you're going to go with that. Of course, it's not always going to be fully right and the timeline's not going to be perfect, but it shouldn't just be a random number that's asked. Like there should be a good amount of math behind that. And again, there's a lot more to it that we could probably all talk about later, as we kind of progress with this series. So, we're not doing the workshop, so I'll skip this. I think, let me see, how much time do we have? Yeah, we can skip the video, and then I think we can get to Q&A. This is just a nice, 3-minute pitch of another founder. Just gives you an example. This exercise is in the slide deck that I sent, but you can do this on your own. This is what we would do in a bigger workshop. But basically, take that template that we just showed you and just do a couple bullet points, either, 3 to 4 bullet points, 2 sentences of each of those sections, and that'll give you like a scaffolding of what you're trying to articulate. And then that's what you would use to start building your pitch deck further. It's just a nice way to get started. And like, here's an example, so like you have this whole pitch deck set up, you're going to say some basic intro stuff. Then you're gonna be like, okay, I'm going to talk about the problem in this theoretical company. It's like there's a bad process in surgery, causes infections or staff risk. And it keeps going back and forth, like throughout all of it. So, when you're building out your pitch deck, you have like the core story, the core things that you want to make sure gets pushed across when you present. And then you can kind of start building your slides out from there, like from the decorative side of it, or how do you do your storyboard. And if you have like a couple founders or like a student group that you're with, this is a cool way for all of you to get together and agree that these are the core elements of your pitch deck. Or of your company. So use it as an exercise. You can have the templates that are here in the slide deck that I'll show you in a second. Here's like a quick way of like what a nice intro slide would look like. So, you can look at this and you clearly already know it's a healthcare company within surgery, just super clean and easy. And this is again for a stage presentation. And then when you get into the problem, when you're pitching on stage, you want the attention to be on you. So if you're going to email this, it says nothing. You're going to have more words for sure. But in a stage presentation, keeping things very clean and where you can just like look at this for 2 seconds, you already kind of read it and you're like, okay, I get where we're going. And then when you get to the problem, the bigger problem is like, okay, and I'm layering it on, like, oh, it's $2 billion in cost to health systems. It's just a nice way to show that clean slides on stage presentations help the audience digest the information better, and then they listen to you. If you're going to send this as an email, you would obviously have to write a lot more context on here. And then last quick key tips, less text is better for stage presentations, as you kind of just showed there. Think about using larger text and color variations for key points. That's always nice. You don't have to keep everything uniform, especially for like a big stage presentation. A nice way to practice, if you're going to do a pitch presentation and they give you like a rule, like 5 minutes you have to pitch there, I just put my slides up on Zoom and I just hit record and I'll just keep doing with a timer until I get it to where I want it to be, and then cut the rest of the footage out and I'll just keep listening to it. It almost like helps you kind of normalize that and like self-paces yourself. And then you'll auto edit like how you speak, because sometimes you're like, oh, I say, this word too much. So it's a nice way to really push you into staying in a time frame and auto edit yourself mentally because you keep listening to yourself. And then lastly, we already kind of talked about an email deck is very different than a stage deck. So, it's a difference of having more text versus less text. This presentation was designed a little bit more for a stage presentation. So I didn't really show that many examples of an email deck, but if anybody wants examples of that, of course, we can share that with you. And then you don't have to scan this now because I just sent you the deck. Here's a bunch of other cool resources. This is another managing director of an accelerator in Florida. It's like kind of quick blurbs about certain areas that we already discussed, but it's nice. They're like 5-6 minute videos. You can kind of hear another perspective from another investor on their perspectives on market size, things like that. And I think, we're all very aligned, but it's just a cool set of videos that if you watch all of these and listen to, take some of what Isaac and I said, you're gonna be well ahead of the game on building a pitch presentation or interacting with investors or even customers. Here's another opportunity to learn. This is a series that me and my partners are doing where we're talking about leadership training, leadership, as a founder from like a new company. And it's just, there's like interesting nuances between, a big corporation and a startup company. So we're going to cover a lot of that, some of the legal stuff that we talked about earlier. And then the other part of this series is sales. Like, how do you build a sales pipeline? How do you manage that? What tools would you use? And then thinking about margins and things like that. So you can scan this and register. All the other links are there. And then lastly, this is a opportunity if you wanted to participate. I'm doing an info call on a more global initiative where we're going to be presenting at different countries. This is going to be in Memphis, but when you scan it, you'll learn more. But it's just you can sign up, and I'll basically explain how global diplomacy and innovation works together, and then we're going to have a big event in Memphis, so everyone here is invited to at least learn and maybe get involved, if you like. But with that, I know we're about out of time. I'm going to stop sharing. Maybe we can field any questions that are here, and then go from there.
Definitely. So I see some questions in the Q&A. So I'm going to ask the one from Benny. Can you share your biggest win from a sales pitch and what did you learn from it? Oh, and I see Michelle has a raised hand. We can do you after Michelle. Thank you.
Yeah, Isaac, you got a good example. You're like deep in sales now.
Knee deep in ice and sales over here in Memphis. So we actually, I would just use an example from last Friday. I texted a doctor who I wouldn't say he's like a friend, but became a friend, right? Because he was a user of our product and he uses one of our products, which is kind of going back to Daniela's question, the first one, how do you explore multiple markets and multiple product ideas? He used one of our products, but we said, hey, we have another product coming to the market. I just want to run it by you and let me know your thoughts. And he's like, I'm always willing to listen to you. So we had a call. I was like, let me just call in my distributor who knows more about the reimbursement side. So called in the distributor. And most of the doctors that we speak with, think that they know everything. So they're just like, well, solve my problems and fix the world for me and tell me how what I could be doing better. So it started off that way, right? And don't be surprised if some of your pitches kind of start off combative. I haven't said a word before, and I've sat in front of people and they say that this isn't going to work. Oh, I've seen another honey company. Oh, another founder that's trying to do something. Okay, good luck. So you may just walk into a scenario where your sales pitch that includes yourself in an interview starts off already at a negative feeling and it sucks, but just expect that, honestly. If you expect that, then you're just like, and you don't have that, then you're pleasantly surprised. So the sales pitch that we had was like, what do you think about this? And then at the end of the day, we just listened. We listened, and then the doctor had like nothing else to say. And then we compiled our thoughts and then we pitched. So that was a different way that we did it. We did almost customer discovery and a pitch all in the same call. We listened, we listened, we listened. We knew our business well enough that we then pitched. And at the end, the doctor said, okay, I'll try it on my next patient that fits this framework and this next profile. So like to me, it's not a huge win where we get a massive account and we get $1 million from this one account, but it's a huge win because now we know the framework to talk to other doctors to get them on board. So to me, that those little wins translate into more revenue later because you can scale that internally and now you have a good framework for your own pitch because you've experienced it in a low risk scenario with somebody that you're happy to go back and forth with.
And I'll just add one context, like really quickly, because I, want to be respectful of everybody's time. The sales is like you're always selling, so you have the sales perspective of like from you to your customer, but way early on, you're literally selling yourself, your vision, your early startup to investors, to family and friends, and whatever it may be. For me, what I learned in those early days was when I got the hard questions is when I learned the most, especially in those early days. So like there was one huge investor presentation I was at, like very early. We're not in revenue or anything like that. And the whole time I'm doing this thing, they're like literally giving me so much, negative questions, like accusing me of like almost like, why are you even like, what's wrong with you? Why are you even doing this and wasting our time? They didn't say it like that, but that was in their tone. And I was like, this is the worst meeting I've ever had. Like they clearly hate me. Nobody's gonna want my stuff. Like these are prestigious investors. They clearly know more than me. Then I finally ended up sitting down because I was like, I don't know, like you guys are just beating me up so much. And then they walked up at the end and like shook my hand. It was like, okay, now we can believe in this because like I have to answer the questions and just do my best. But what I learned from that was sometimes these very difficult questions versus the ones that are like your fans, like you go meet, be like, oh my God, I truly believe in you. This is great. Like that's very nice to have the support. But sometimes the ones that are like, why are you so upset about what I just said? I don't really get that. They have some reason that they're that way. And if you can really dig into it and understand what that is, that's a huge win for you to figure out what you can do to be a better salesperson in whatever context that may be. The other part, and Isaac can probably talk about this for days as well as I can, is like getting over that hump of that negative feedback, or that, kind of that jarring, like, oh, I got to go out there. Some people might not like what I'm doing. As a founder, huge growth. So maybe a little tangent, but I think that kind of goes together. And I know we're out of time, but I'm fine with staying on for there's other people who want questions, or we can obviously answer those via email if people want to send it in. I'll just kind of let you guys make that choice, Lonnie and Susan.
Yeah, I think we're going to end it here. And then the people who had questions, feel free to follow up with Ryan and Isaac. I believe on LinkedIn would be a great way to connect with them, or through email. I also shared a link to our entrepreneurship LinkedIn group. So feel free to join there, where we're going to have a lot of updates and also the chance to connect with people. So thank you so much for joining. Our February upcoming event is the Entrepreneurship Cafecito event. So that, I believe, is February 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern time. And so we're going to be dropping some links in the chat to RSVP for that, as well as a chance to RSVP to be one of the founder conversation leaders. And so Susan is dropping the links for that. Thank you so much, Susan. And after the event closes, please make sure that you take the survey. It's so helpful for us to create future events, and also to perhaps answer any questions that didn't get answered today. But thank you so much. Thank you so much to Ryan and Isaac. It was an amazing presentation. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thanks for
Thanks
joining,
again.
everyone. I will follow up tomorrow with all the resources, the links, the slides. Thanks to everyone for participating tonight. And thank you, Lonnie, for helping moderate.
Yes, thank you, Lonnie.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Take
All
care.
right.